Everything changed in a single moment. One sentence, one blow, and the entire Parliament fell into stunned silence. Nigel Farage didn't just challenge Starmer. He tore through his arguments like a storm ripping off the roof of a fragile house. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a meltdown, a collapse, and a moment so explosive that even veteran MPs were left shaken. Because when Farage finally stood up, the room didn't realise they were seconds away from witnessing the most chaotic confrontation of the year. It began with tension you could almost feel, thick like smoke hanging over the chamber. MPs leaned forward, staff froze in the aisles, and even the Speaker's voice trembled as Farage rose to speak. Starmer tried to hide it, but everyone could see the flicker of worry across his face, the kind that appears when you know the spotlight is about to turn into a burning heat lamp. For days, Starmer had brushed off concerns, insisting he had everything under control. But today, the energy in the room was different, sharp, unpredictable, and ready to explode. Farage didn't rush, he didn't shout. His first words were calm, too calm, like the quiet before lightning hits. He stood there with the confidence of a man who had waited years for this exact moment. And when he finally struck, it was brutal. He called out Starmer's contradictions, his weak defences, his shaky explanations. Every line was a direct hit. Every statement pushed Starmer deeper into the corner. You could see Labour MPs shifting uncomfortably, whispering to each other, their confidence draining second by second. And Starmer, he cracked. His replies grew messy, rushed, almost panicked. He tried deflecting, then blaming, then joking, yet every attempt fell flat. Farage answered each excuse with precision, exposing gaps so big the entire chamber could see through them. The more Starmer struggled, the colder the room became. Even MPs on his own side avoided making eye contact, as if they didn't want to be associated with the slow motion collapse unfolding in front of them. Then came the breaking point. Farage dropped a line so sharp, so unexpected, that gasps echoed across the benches. It wasn't just criticism, it was the kind of statement that slices through political armour and leaves someone standing there with nowhere left to hide. Starmer froze, his face tightened, his voice faltered. The meltdown had begun, and in that moment you could feel the power shift across the chamber like a wave crashing through the room. Labour MPs started to react. Some jumped up to object, others buried their faces in papers, a few even stood up as if preparing to leave. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight. People weren't listening anymore, they were bracing for whatever would come next. Farage didn't chase them. He didn't raise his voice, he simply continued speaking with the calm confidence of someone who knew he had already won at the moment. Starmer attempted one last defence, but his words stumbled, his tone cracked. His arguments collapsed before they even left his mouth. Watching him struggle felt like watching a dam burst from pressure it was never built to handle. The chamber was no longer debating. It was watching a leader unravel under the weight of his own contradictions. And Farage, he stood solid, unwavering, fully in control of the storm he had unleashed. By the time the Speaker intervened, the damage was done. Starmer looked drained, defeated, visibly shaken. What began as a routine exchange had transformed into a full-scale political ambush, and for the first time all year, the Labour front bench looked truly rattled. Rumours began circulating. Within minutes, whispers of MPs preparing to walk out, staff advising damage control, internal phones lighting up with frantic messages. But the meltdown was only beginning, and the chamber had no idea what was coming next. The moment the Speaker tried to restore order, everything spiralled even faster. The chamber felt unstable, like a building with its foundations shaking. Starmer tried to regain control, lifting his notes with trembling hands, forcing a stiff smile as if he could pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't ripped through his authority. But Farage wasn't done, and everyone knew it. The air carried the feeling that something even bigger was about to hit. A second wave, stronger, sharper, impossible for Starmer to dodge. Farage stepped forward again and the entire room tensed. It wasn't just the words he used, it was the timing, the precision, the way he delivered each point like a hammer striking a cracking surface. He exposed internal disputes, highlighted decisions Starmer thought were buried, and revealed weaknesses the Labour front bench desperately hoped no one would mention. Each sentence sent shockwaves through the benches. Even MPs who normally ignored Farage leaned closer, realising he had just opened doors that Starmer had tried for months to keep locked. Starmer attempted to interrupt, pointing, lecturing, raising his voice, but it came across desperate, like someone trying to hold back a flood with their bare hands. The more he talked, the more Farage smirked. A small, sharp smile that told the entire chamber he had total control of the moment. The meltdown wasn't slowing down. It was growing, swallowing the room like a rising tide. And then it happened, the eruption on the Labour benches. One MP slammed their folder shut so loudly the sound echoed off the wood panels. Another stood up abruptly, shaking their head in anger. A handful began arguing among themselves, ignoring Starmer entirely as panic began spreading between them. You could see it! Their confidence in their own leader was breaking. Their unity was cracking in real time. Farage paused, letting the chaos breathe. That silence was more devastating than any accusation. He didn't need to speak. Starmer's own MPs were tearing the moment apart on their own. When he finally continued, his tone was calm, almost casual, but every line hit with the weight of a sledgehammer. He questioned the government's direction, its promises, its ability to lead. He described the growing frustration across the country, the widening gap between what Labour claimed and what they delivered. And with each statement, Starmer's grip on the narrative slipped even further. Something inside Starmer snapped. He raised his voice sharply, trying to shout Farage down, but his words stumbled. He repeated himself. He lost track of his notes. It was like watching someone drowning in front of the entire chamber. Even the speaker hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation burn out on its own. Farage didn't shout back. He simply waited until Starmer finished tripping over his own argument, then delivered another crushing line that cut straight through the noise. That was the moment Labour MPs began leaving their seats. Not yet fleeing the chamber, but standing, whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. They weren't frustrated with Farage, they were frustrated with Starmer. The leader they defended for months was falling apart at the worst possible time, and the chamber could see every second of it. The tension grew so thick it was suffocating. You could feel the weight of the moment pressing against the room like a heavy fog. Even MPs who normally enjoyed the drama looked uneasy, unsure how far the meltdown would go. Farage, sensing the shift, spoke directly about leadership. Strong words, sharp comparisons, brutally honest questions about whether Starmer could withstand pressure or make tough decisions. Every phrase felt like another crack forming in the Labour front bench. Starmer tried to strike back again, but each attempt fell hollow. The confidence wasn't there, the authority was missing. His voice shook, his face drained, and his frustration spilled out in short, sharp bursts. He wasn't debating anymore, he was struggling to keep his own argument alive. Farage entered the exchange with one devastating final line, a sentence that sliced through the chamber and left Starmer frozen. The silence that followed felt unnatural, heavy, almost deafening. And then the reaction hit like a shockwave. Some MPs gasped, others put their heads in their hands. A few simply stood up and walked out, unable to watch their own leader crumble any further. The meltdown was no longer unfolding. It had fully erupted. The chamber was trembling under the force of it, and the entire nation would soon hear what happened next. The walkouts began like small sparks. One MP slipping out quietly, another shaking their head as they left. But within moments, those sparks turned into a chain reaction. Rows on the Labour benches started to empty as frustration boiled over. Some left in anger, others in embarrassment, but all of them carried the same expression: disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The chamber, once packed and buzzing with noise, felt strangely hollow as the reality of the meltdown settled in. Starmer watched them go, his face tightening with every departing figure, as if each exit peeled away another layer of his authority. Farage didn't gloat, he didn't smile, he simply stood there, hands folded, observing the chaos like a man who understood that the damage was already beyond repair. He knew he didn't need to push any further. The spectacle unfolding around him was louder than any speech he could give. The speaker tried to regain order, calling for calm, urging MPs to return to their seats. But the words floated uselessly in the air. The room had tipped too far, the atmosphere fractured beyond control. Starmer attempted to continue, but his voice faltered the moment he opened his mouth. The echo of his own words bounced off the near-empty benches, making the contrast even sharper. He shuffled his papers, trying to hide the tremor in his hands, forcing himself to stare forward instead of glancing at the MPs abandoning him. In that moment, he looked less like a leader and more like a man watching the ground crumble beneath his feet. Farage stepped forward again and the chamber tensed as if bracing for impact. His tone remained steady, almost surgical, as he dissected the government's failures one by one. It wasn't the volume of his voice that carried the power, it was the clarity. He brought up promises broken, plans abandoned, and rising frustration across the country. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that Starmer wasn't just losing the argument. He was losing the room, losing momentum, losing control. The few Labour MPs who remained sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with each other. Some stared at the table in front of them, others clenched their fists, and a few looked at Farage with the kind of stunned respect that only comes when someone does the unthinkable. One MP tried to interrupt Farage, but their voice cracked halfway through, drawing murmurs from across the chamber. Farage paused only long enough to let the moment sink in before continuing, undisturbed. Starmer attempted another response, but the fire was gone. His words lacked conviction, his tone lacked force, and his arguments fell flat before they even left his mouth. He repeated lines he used before, but they sounded rehearsed, hollow, disconnected from the collapsing reality around him. He lifted his notes again, gripping them so tightly the pages bent, but even that small attempt at composure betrayed the panic hiding beneath the surface. Farage delivered another devastating sequence, quick, sharp, and brutally direct. He questioned Starmer's leadership, his decision-making, and worst of all, his ability to stand in the pressure of real scrutiny. The chamber rippled with reactions, whispers, shifting seats, the uneasy rustling of MPs who knew they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed across the nation. Farage's words weren't just criticisms, they were the kind that leave a permanent mark. Starmer snapped back, raising his voice, trying to regain authority through volume rather than substance. But each shout only revealed how unsteady he had become. His frustration poured out with every sentence, not as strength, but as desperation. The tension in the air tightened again, gripping the room like a vice as Farage calmly let the outburst pass, then responded with another cool, controlled blow that drained the last of Starmer's composure. At this point, the speaker looked genuinely worried. This wasn't debate. This wasn't politics as usual. This was the collapse happening in real time, and everyone could feel the weight of it pressing down on the chamber. More MPs slipped out quietly, unable to handle the sight of their own leader unravelling under pressure. Each departure was another confirmation that the meltdown had reached a point of no return. Farage's final point in this round wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a single, simple sentence that cut deeper than any explosion of anger could. A line that forced even the remaining Labour MPs to freeze. A line that made Starmer's face drop as if the very foundation beneath him had given way. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke, and no one even dared to shift in their seat. It was the kind of silence that signals a turning point, a moment where everyone realises things will not return to normal after this. And as the chamber held its breath, waiting for what would come next, it became painfully clear the meltdown hadn't ended. It was about to enter its most explosive phase yet.